If everything were stripped from you, money, status, connections, and you were forced to begin again from nothing, what would you do first? Not what sounds impressive, not what feels safe. What would actually move you toward your first $100,000? Most men guess wrong. They chase opportunity instead of building structure. They look for the right idea instead of becoming the right operator. And because of this, they remain busy, but never effective. Let me give you something direct. Wealth does not begin with opportunity. It begins with control. Control over your attention, your decisions, your actions when no one is watching. Because without control, even the best opportunity dissolves in your hands. You start strong, then slowly drift. And drift is silent. You don't quit loudly. You delay. You negotiate. You tell yourself you will return to it tomorrow. And before long, the momentum you once had is gone, and you are left wondering what happened. You have lived this before. The new plan, the surge of focus, the belief that this time will be different. Then distractions appear. Doubt enters quietly, and without noticing it, you begin to slow down. This is not lack of potential. It is lack of direction sustained over time. The first $100,000 is not complicated, but it demands something most men never give: concentration. Not partial focus, not divided effort, but complete attention directed toward one outcome long enough for results to form. And this is where most fail. They cannot stay with one thing. They begin, then switch, commit, then reconsider, move forward, then look sideways. And every time they shift direction, they reset their progress back to zero. Let me ask you something honestly. How many paths have you started and left unfinished? How many ideas have you abandoned not because they failed, but because they did not produce results quickly enough? That pattern is expensive, because wealth is not built through starting, it is built through continuing. If I had to begin again, I would choose one path and I would remove all others. Not because other opportunities do not exist, but because divided attention guarantees slow progress. Focus creates speed. The moment you eliminate alternatives, your mind sharpens, your energy concentrates. Your actions become more deliberate, because now there is no decision to make, only execution. But direction alone is not enough. You must choose something that produces value, not what feels interesting. Not what sounds impressive, but what solves a real problem, something people are already trying to fix, something they are willing to pay for. Money follows usefulness, and usefulness is proven through action. So I would act immediately, not waiting to feel ready, not waiting to become perfect. I would begin offering value in its simplest form, learning through real interaction, refining through feedback, improving through repetition. Because action creates clarity, and clarity eliminates hesitation. There will be a moment when it feels slow, when effort does not seem to return results. When your mind begins to suggest that you should change direction, that this path is not working, that something else might be better, that is the moment most men fail. Not at the beginning, but just before progress appears. Because progress is often invisible at first. It builds quietly beneath the surface, in skill, in understanding, in positioning. And because it cannot yet be seen, It is often abandoned. This is why persistence is required. Not intensity for a few days, but continuation beyond the point where results are obvious. The ability to remain in motion when there is no immediate reward, reinforcing your effort. Persistence creates momentum, and momentum changes everything. Once momentum begins, effort starts to return results. Results build confidence. Confidence increases action. And suddenly, what once felt slow begins to accelerate. But momentum only comes to those who remain. Most never reach it because they leave too early. Another mistake I would avoid is complexity. Most men believe they need multiple streams of income, multiple strategies, multiple systems. But the first $100,000 is not built through diversification, it is built through concentration. One offer, one process, repeated consistently. Simplicity scales faster than complexity. Refinement creates leverage. The better you become at delivering value, the more you are paid for it. And the more you are paid, the more opportunity expands. But it all begins with one direction and the discipline to stay with it. In this lesson, you will discover the exact framework. How to choose your path, how to act without delay, how to maintain focus when distractions appear, and how to build momentum that compounds into income. But before any method works, you must accept this. You do not need more ideas. You need more commitment to one idea. And the moment you choose fully, without hesitation, and refuse to retreat, you begin the process, not of hoping for wealth, but of creating it. If I were placed in the position of beginning again, stripped of all possessions, deprived of influence, and left with nothing but the use of my own mind, I would not first concern myself with plans, nor with opportunity, nor even with the means by which money is earned. I would begin with something far less visible, yet far more powerful, the establishment of control over myself. For it has been made evident through observation that men do not fail because the world denies them opportunity. They fail because they have not learned to direct their own thoughts long enough to make use of any opportunity they encounter. They attempt to command results while remaining subject to distraction, delay, and uncertainty. This is a reversal of order. A man must first command himself, only then may he command outcomes. Consider the pattern which most men follow, though few recognize it. They begin with intention. There is a moment of clarity, a surge of energy, a decision that this time their effort will be sustained. They set a course and proceed with confidence, believing that their direction alone will carry them forward. Yet within a short time, this force diminishes, not suddenly, but gradually. A small delay appears. A minor distraction is permitted. A slight reconsideration is entertained. And with each of these, the strength of the original decision weakens until the man finds himself no longer advancing, but merely occupying himself with movement that leads nowhere. This is not failure in the ordinary sense. It is drift. And drift is the most dangerous condition a man may enter. For it does not announce itself as defeat. It disguises itself as harmless delay, as necessary adjustment, as temporary rest. A man does not say, "I have abandoned my course." He says, "I will return to it tomorrow." Yet tomorrow rarely arrives in the form he expects. Instead, it becomes another day of partial effort, divided attention, and reduced conviction. The direction that once seemed clear becomes uncertain, not because the path has changed, but because the man's control over himself has diminished. It must be understood that the mind, when left unguided, does not remain neutral. It moves toward ease, toward comfort, toward that which requires the least resistance. This tendency is natural, yet it must be governed. For if it is allowed to lead, it will draw a man away from his chosen course without his full awareness. He will not feel as though he has chosen to retreat. He will simply find that he has not advanced. There exists within every individual two opposing inclinations. One urges him toward effort, toward discipline, toward the fulfillment of his purpose. The other invites him toward delay, toward diversion, toward the abandonment of effort at the first sign of discomfort. Whichever of these inclinations is permitted to guide his actions will determine the result he obtains. Most men do not consciously select between them. They respond, they yield, they follow the easier impulse, not because they lack desire for success, but because they have not trained themselves to resist deviation. Thus, though they may begin with promise, they do not continue with certainty. This is why control must be the first concern. Not control over others, not control over circumstance, control over one's own attention, thought, and action. Without this, no plan, no matter how sound, can be executed with sufficient consistency to produce results. A man may possess knowledge, yet fail to apply it. He may possess opportunity, yet fail to act upon it. He may possess ability, yet fail to sustain its use. In each case, the cause is the same: lack of control. If I were to begin again, I would therefore train myself in this single capacity before pursuing any outward aim. I would practice holding my attention upon a chosen task, refusing to permit it to wander. I would condition myself to act upon decision without delay, removing the habit of negotiation with my own intentions. For it is in this negotiation that most men lose. They decide, and then they reconsider. They commit, and then they question. They begin, and then they hesitate. And in this repeated cycle, the force of their action is dissipated before it has time to produce effect. There is a great difference between movement and progress. A man may remain in constant motion and yet arrive nowhere if his motion is not directed and sustained. He may engage in many activities, believing himself productive, yet find that none of them have advanced him toward a definite result. This illusion of productivity is one of the most common errors. It allows a man to feel occupied while avoiding the discipline required to achieve. He becomes busy instead of effective, active instead of directed, and because he is moving, he does not immediately recognize that he is not advancing. If I were beginning anew, I would avoid this error entirely. I would concern myself not with how much I do, but with whether what I do is aligned with a single, definite direction, and whether I remain with it long enough to shape it into result. For progress requires continuity. It is not created through scattered effort, but through repeated application of force in one direction. Each interruption weakens the accumulation. Each restart returns the man to the beginning, and thus the habit of starting without continuing becomes one of the greatest obstacles to advancement. It must be corrected at once. Control is not established through a single act. It is formed through repetition. Each time a man follows through on a decision, he strengthens his ability to do so again. Each time he resists distraction, he increases his command over attention. Each time he continues in the absence of immediate reward, he builds endurance. These small acts, repeated, form a structure within the mind. And once this structure is established, action becomes easier. Not because effort is reduced, but because resistance is diminished. The man no longer struggles to begin. He begins because he has decided. He no longer struggles to continue. He continues because it has become his nature. This transformation, gradual yet powerful. It marks the point at which discipline shifts from effort to habit. And once discipline becomes habit, progress accelerates. For the man is no longer required to persuade himself each day to act. He acts without negotiation. He proceeds without hesitation. He advances without the constant need for renewed motivation. This is the condition in which results are most readily produced. It must also be recognized that those who achieve in this manner are perceived differently by others. Though they may not yet possess visible success, they exhibit qualities that distinguish them. They appear steady where others are uncertain. They appear deliberate where others are reactive. They do not alter their course without reason, nor do they abandon their efforts at the first sign of delay. This steadiness creates trust, for men are drawn to those who can be relied upon, and reliability begins with the ability to rely upon oneself. The man who governs his own actions becomes dependable in the eyes of others. His words carry weight because they are supported by consistent behavior. His efforts inspire confidence because they are not easily disrupted. This perception becomes an advantage. Even before wealth is acquired, the foundation upon which it may be built is established. Let it be understood clearly. Wealth does not come to the man who begins often. It comes to the man who continues. And continuation is not a matter of desire. It is a matter of control. There will be moments when the inclination to delay will arise. There will be times when the absence of immediate results will tempt reconsideration. The mind will offer suggestions that appear reasonable, proposing that a different course may yield quicker return. At such moments, control must assert itself. The decision must be held. The direction must remain unchanged, for it is precisely at these points that progress is being formed, though it may not yet be visible. To withdraw at such a moment is to forfeit the accumulation that has begun. To remain is to advance beyond those who have left. If I were to express this as a principle, I would say, before seeking wealth, establish order within. Before seeking opportunity, develop the capacity to remain. Before seeking results, acquire the discipline to continue without them. For once these are secured, the rest becomes a matter of application. Let this thought be impressed firmly. I command my attention, I direct my actions, I remain fixed upon my course until the result is achieved. Repeat this not as mere words, but as instruction. For the mind, when given repeated direction, begins to accept it as law. And when law governs the mind, Action follows without resistance. In this condition, success ceases to be uncertain. It becomes the natural consequence of controlled effort applied over time. And thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, I would begin here, not with opportunity, not with plans, but with control. Having established control over one's own mind, the next step, if I were to begin again from nothing, would not be to search widely, nor to examine countless possibilities, but to choose, with finality, a single direction toward which all effort shall be applied. For it is not lack of opportunity that delays most men, it is the presence of too many. The mind, when presented with numerous paths, becomes unsettled. It compares, it questions, it hesitates. And in this hesitation, action is weakened before it has begun. The man believes he is being thoughtful, when in truth he is dividing his force among competing considerations. A divided mind produces divided effort, and divided effort produces little result. The man who keeps several pursuits open does so under the impression that he is preserving flexibility. He tells himself that he will observe which path yields the greatest return and then commit more fully to it. Yet he fails to recognize that none of the paths will yield significant return without concentrated effort. Thus, he waits for evidence that cannot appear. He seeks results before he has supplied sufficient cause, and in doing so, he remains in a constant state of beginning, never reaching the point at which progress becomes visible. If I were beginning again, I would remove this condition entirely. I would choose one path, not because it is perfect, but because it is sufficient. For perfection is not required at the outset. Direction is. It must be understood that the value of a path lies not in its initial promise, but in the degree to which it permits continued action and refinement. A simple undertaking, pursued with constancy, will yield greater return than a superior plan abandoned too soon. Therefore, I would not seek the most impressive opportunity. I would seek one that is useful, one that meets a need already present. For money follows usefulness, not intention. Where men are already attempting to solve a difficulty, there exists a point at which value may be delivered, and where value is delivered consistently, compensation follows as a natural consequence. This principle removes uncertainty. The man does not need to invent desire. He needs only to respond to it. Having selected such a direction, I would then perform an act which few are willing to perform. I would close all other paths, not temporarily, not partially, but completely. I would remove from my consideration the constant question of whether another course may be more favorable. For this question, though it appears harmless, is one of the greatest sources of weakness. Each time it arises, it withdraws attention from the present path. Each time it is entertained, it reduces the force applied to current effort, and in time it leads to abandonment not because the path has failed, but because it has not been given sufficient continuity to succeed. Indecision in this form is subtle. It does not appear as fear. It appears as analysis, as careful thought, as the desire to choose wisely. Yet, when carried too far, it becomes paralysis. The man delays action under the belief that he is improving his position, when in fact he is preventing progress altogether. There comes a point at which decision must replace deliberation, and once made, that decision must be held. If I were beginning again, I would not permit myself to choose repeatedly. I would choose once, and thereafter devote my attention not to reconsideration, but to execution. For the act of deciding, when repeated daily, consumes energy that could be applied to action. The man who must determine each morning whether he shall continue begins already weakened. The man who has determined once begins immediately with strength. This is why commitment produces speed, not because the man moves faster, but because he no longer stops to question his movement. There is no delay between thought and action. There is only continuation. This condition creates a powerful advantage, for while others hesitate, he proceeds. While others reconsider, he refines. And over time, this difference in continuity produces a difference in result. It must also be understood that the early stages of any undertaking will not provide immediate reward. There will be a period in which effort appears to produce little. During this time, the mind will attempt to reopen the question of direction. It will suggest that perhaps another path would yield quicker results, that perhaps the current course is not the most effective, that perhaps a change is necessary. These suggestions must be resisted, not because they are always incorrect, but because they arise too soon. Progress in its early stages is often concealed. It develops in the form of increased skill, improved judgment, and deeper understanding. These changes are not immediately visible in the form of income, yet they are essential to its later appearance. To abandon the path during this stage is to abandon the very process through which results are formed. If I were beginning again, I would expect this period. I would prepare for it. I would regard it not as a sign of failure, but as evidence that I have entered the stage in which transformation occurs. And in doing so, I would remove the impulse to retreat. Consider the example of Andrew Carnegie, who did not divide his attention among many industries, but committed himself to one and advanced within it steadily. He did not seek constant change. He sought improvement within a chosen field. This constancy allowed him to gain understanding that others who shifted frequently could not acquire. And in understanding, he gained advantage. As this process continues, others will begin to observe a difference. They will notice that the man no longer speaks of many plans. He no longer pursues every new idea that presents itself. He no longer changes direction in response to temporary conditions. He has become fixed, and this fixed quality produces trust. For men are drawn to those who remain. They rely upon those whose direction is stable. They recognize, even without analysis, that such a man possesses strength of decision, a quality that is rare. This perception becomes an asset. Opportunities, when they appear, will begin to align with his direction, not because he sought them widely, but because he remained where he was long enough to be found. This is the reversal of the common approach. Most men chase opportunity. Few position themselves so that opportunity is drawn toward them, and positioning is the result of sustained direction. It must also be emphasized that simplicity in the beginning is superior to complexity. The man who attempts to construct many sources of income before mastering one will dissipate his effort. He will find himself managing structure without producing substance. Therefore, I would begin with one offering, one method, one process, and I would repeat it, not until it becomes perfect, but until it becomes effective. For effectiveness produces confidence, and confidence increases action. As action increases, understanding deepens. As understanding deepens, refinement occurs. And through refinement, the same effort begins to produce greater return. This is the principle by which simplicity grows into strength. It is not through expansion, but through improvement. The man who expands prematurely builds upon uncertainty. The man who refines first builds upon certainty, and certainty allows for growth without collapse. If I were to state this as instruction, I would say, choose one path, close all others, apply your effort without interruption, refine through repetition, and remain until the result appears. Let this be fixed firmly within the mind. I choose once. I do not divide my effort. I remain upon my path until it yields its reward. Repeat this not for comfort, but for command. For the mind, when directed repeatedly, begins to accept instruction as law. And when law governs thought, action follows without hesitation. In time, what once required discipline becomes natural. The man no longer struggles to remain. He remains because he has decided, and in that decision, held firmly and without retreat, he begins to move forward with a force that cannot easily be stopped. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, I would not seek many directions. I would select one, and I would remain. Having chosen a definite direction, the next error, which must be removed if I were to begin again, is the habit of delay, disguised as preparation. For many men do not fail because they lack direction, but because they postpone action under the belief that they must first become ready. This belief is false. Readiness is not a condition that precedes action. It is a condition that is created by action. The man who waits until he feels prepared will wait indefinitely. For the mind, when left to its own devices, will always discover some deficiency, some reason why the present moment is not yet suitable for beginning. It will suggest that more knowledge is required, that conditions must improve, that confidence must increase. Yet none of these are produced through waiting. They are produced through doing. If I were beginning again, I would act immediately, not with perfect understanding, not with complete certainty, but with sufficient direction to begin. For action, even when imperfect, produces a result, and every result, whether favorable or not, provides instruction. This instruction cannot be obtained through thought alone. It must be experienced. There exists a great difference between the man who studies a path and the man who walks it. The former may understand its appearance, its structure, its general direction, but the latter acquires knowledge that cannot be conveyed through description, the knowledge of movement, resistance, adjustment, and timing. This knowledge is gained only through action, and it is this knowledge that allows refinement. If I were to delay until I possessed complete understanding, I would never begin. And if I never begin, I never refine. And if I never refine, I never advance. Thus, delay becomes the cause of stagnation. It must be removed. There is also another danger in postponement. Each time a man decides to act, and then delays, he weakens his own authority over himself. He gives instruction, and then he disobeys it. He forms intention, and then he abandons it. And in doing so, he teaches his mind that decision does not require execution. This habit is destructive. For the mind, once accustomed to disregarding its own commands, becomes increasingly difficult to direct. If I were beginning again, I would correct this at once. I would act upon decision immediately, even if the action were small, even if it were imperfect. For it is not the size of the action that matters in the beginning, but the establishment of the pattern, decision followed by action, without delay, without negotiation. This pattern, once repeated, strengthens self-command. The man begins to trust himself. He knows that when he decides, he will act. And this trust removes hesitation. For hesitation is born from uncertainty, not uncertainty about the path, but uncertainty about one's own willingness to follow it. When this uncertainty is removed, action becomes direct. It becomes immediate. And in this immediacy, progress begins. It must also be understood that early action will not produce perfect results. It cannot. The man who expects perfection at the beginning will be disappointed, and in his disappointment, he may withdraw. He may interpret his early errors as evidence that he is unprepared, when in truth they are evidence that he has begun. Mistakes are not interruptions, they are instruction. Each error reveals something that was not previously known. Each attempt, though imperfect, contributes to the formation of skill. And through repeated attempts, the man improves not because he has waited, but because he has acted. If I were beginning again, I would welcome these early imperfections. I would regard them not as signs of inadequacy, but as necessary steps in the process of refinement. For no man begins with mastery. He acquires it, and he acquires it through action. There is also a distinction to be made between planning and execution. Planning has its place, but when extended beyond its proper limit, it becomes a substitute for action. The man convinces himself that he is progressing because he is thinking, organizing, preparing. Yet no result is produced through preparation alone. Results are produced through execution. Therefore, I would limit preparation to what is necessary to begin, no more. I would not attempt to foresee every difficulty, nor to eliminate every uncertainty, for many of these cannot be known in advance. They must be encountered and then resolved, and they can only be encountered through action. If I were to delay until all uncertainty had been removed, I would delay forever. Thus, I would accept uncertainty as a condition of beginning, not as an obstacle, but as a companion.